What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Sabertooth War. It's been a little while since we covered everything, so as a bit of a refresher here, the long and short of the story is that Sabertooth is trying to kill Wolverine and basically destroy everybody that's close to Wolverine, which for the most part he's done, right? But what we do here is we pick up in the aftermath of the previous issue that we covered, which was basically Sabertooth depowering Wolverine. And that was really one of the major things that he was getting at here, because what we learned was that it wasn't enough for Sabertooth to kill Wolverine because he has a healing factor, he would always come back. By taking away his powers and then trying to kill him, it would basically make things simple. What ended up happening here is the Exiles appeared. Now, we're not gonna go super in-depth into them because the Exiles are not really important even for this story. Traditionally, the Exiles are a multiversal team of superheroes in Marvel Comics. In this story, they're just a group of mutants that have like a vendetta against Sabertooth, because like he was basically a jerk to him a few times. And he even kind of tortured them a little bit, so I guess it sort of makes sense that they would be after him. You know, torture's kind of a terrible thing. But while Wolverine is fighting with the Adamantium, albeit without his healing factor, it's enough for Sabertooth to get the upper hand. And so what ends up happening here is one of the Exiles ends up revealing that she was actually given a seed by Doug Ramsey, who is traditionally one of the mutants that was part of the Quiet Council, the governing body of Krakoa. A little bit of history here for those of you guys who are just catching up. Sabertooth, for the longest time, was not in Marvel Comics. And the reason for that was that at the very beginning of Jonathan Hickman's House and Powers of X, he was locked in what was called the Pit. It was basically this giant prison in the center of the island of Krakoa where all the mutants resided. And what that meant was that he was just kind of isolated and locked away. He ended up kind of reforming things and making it his own personal prison. But Doug Ramsey was one of the people that kind of visited him initially and told him what was going on and granted him the ability to control the Pit and make it his own personal reality. What Doug Ramsey also does here is he says, when the time came that Sabertooth eventually escaped the Pit and the Exiles were on the hunt for him, Doug Ramsey presented them with a seed. And what he said is this seed is not going to be enough to kill Sabertooth, but it is going to be enough to make him wish he was dead. And so that's why one of the Exiles just sort of runs up on Sabertooth and then throws the seed at him, which basically turns into a giant Venus flytrap and it consumes him. But that happens after Sabertooth uses the head of Quentin Quire to essentially fry the brain of Wolverine. Now, Quentin Quire is a ridiculously powerful telepath. Technically, he should be dead, but Sabertooth had discovered a way to kind of weaponize the head of Quentin Quire by quote-unquote keeping him alive, even though he's technically dead, and just kind of going from there. But the point is, Wolverine's brain is effectively fried, right? He's not dead, but he's just kind of knocked out. And because he doesn't have a healing factor, he doesn't recover as fast as he traditionally would. But of course, this seed is thrown on the ground, and then Sabertooth is consumed by it, and he's stuck in this sort of Venus flytrap. Now, another plot device that's going on here, and it's relatively simple because there's only two. While you do have the main Sabertooth who's fighting against Wolverine, you also have alternate reality versions of himself. Now again, we have a playlist so you can kind of get caught up, but the long and short of this is that what Sabertooth had done is he had built on the actions of his son, Graydon Creed. Now Graydon Creed is historically a rabid anti-mutant guy. If you're familiar with X-Men the Animated Series or X-Men 97, you know who Graydon Creed is. In those shows, he's the leader of the Friends of Humanity. And I believe he also was in Marvel Comics. But the thing here is that he had just kind of been thrown into a different dimension in a previous story. He's been brought back by these other alternate reality versions of Sabertooth. The whole idea behind Graydon Creed is that what he was doing was opening portals to the multiverse and just pulling in all these alternate reality versions of Sabertooth and then just killing them. It was pretty brutal. Either that or he was like basically lopping their heads off and then turning them into robots. But the thing about it is once he was defeated and cast off, because he's so capable at killing Sabertooths, these other alternate reality versions have turned against the main Sabertooth. So they want to destroy him. So really kind of everybody's out to kill Sabertooth, right? That's really the goal here. But when Graydon Creed shows back up, he's kind of a cybernetic, right? Kind of a cyborg type guy. Now he's going to be more of a background character over the course of this. You're not really going to see a whole lot going on with him. Instead, what we end up doing here is picking up with Wolverine once he wakes up. And what he does is he basically says, given the fact that he's now powerless, right? He's lost his healing factor, but still has adamantium, he needs some way to be able to defeat Sabertooth without having his traditional powers. And so what he does is he pulls the exiles together. And again, they're just kind of a background team. They're just sort of there along for the ride. Even within most of the story, they don't really matter. And to be honest, I don't really know why they're here, to be quite frank. But Wolverine really kind of pulls a sort of Nick Fury card, in the sense that, for those of you guys who are familiar with Nick Fury, he had bunkers all over the place, across the world, in case things went south. There was always a way for him to do what he needed to do in order to find some way to come out on top. Wolverine's much the same way. And so what Wolverine reveals here is that he has a kind of hidden bunker that exists out there. Now, while they're on the hunt for that, one of the things I do want to do is I do want to sidetrack and focus on Graydon Creed for a second. Because as part of the larger Fall of X event that's going on in Marvel, when you had the initial attack against the mutant population and a bunch of them were killed and so on and so forth, you had the Stark Sentinels, right? Sentinels that were developed using Stark tech, albeit against the wishes of Tony Stark. But the fact is, Graydon Creed just ends up using his kind of technology to take over one of the Sentinels and then just starts obliterating them all over the place. So you're going to notice as we get further and further into the story that the Sentinels basically vanish, and there's seemingly no real indication of where they went had we not brought that up. And so with Wolverine and his guys kind of making their way through this kind of wintry region, they end up coming across this bunker. And that once they get into it, Wolverine, of course, cracks the door open, and then he steps inside, and he's kind of in there for a minute or two, and then he comes back out with adamantium armor and a Muramasa blade. Now, this is probably the deadliest Wolverine's ever been in the history of Marvel Comics, even taking into account his healing factor. The reason for this is that unless you're talking about something like Thor's hammer, right, Uru metal, that's carved into a sharper stabbing object that could cut through this armor, or like anti-metal, right, so like Arctic vibranium or Antarctic vibranium, then for the most part, nothing's gonna stand against this suit of armor. The Muramasa blade is specifically designed to nullify the abilities of Wolverine, but healing factors in general. In fact, one of the cool things about the Muramasa blade, it was commissioned by Wolverine himself, right? He literally went to Muramasa, just this world-class swordsman, and he put a portion of his soul inside the sword. And the idea was that if he ever went rogue, that he gave the sword to Cyclops and said, "This is how you kill me. Right, this is how you do me in, right? Stab me with this thing, my healing factor will deactivate, and then you can kill me using any conventional means that can penetrate my adamantium skeleton, or at the very least, disintegrate me down to my adamantium skeleton, and then that's it, right? Game over for Wolverine." And so the Muramasa blade being used here will shut down the healing factor of Sabertooth if Sabertooth encounters it. Here's the thing, the ending of this is crazy, because what ends up happening here is we pick up in the aftermath of Sabertooth being thrown inside this seat, and the story kind of seems to go sideways for a second, right? Like he just sort of wakes up inside this Iron Maiden, and that you end up having Doug Ramsey who walks in. Now, this is not actually Doug Ramsey, and of course Sabertooth picks up on this immediately, and he realizes that being stuck inside this seed is very similar to being stuck inside the pit. His physical body is inside this giant Venus flytrap, but his mind is somewhere else. And so when Doug Ramsey sits down with him, he goes so far as to say, "I want to be clear with you, Mr. Creed, I am not Doug Ramsey. You met him when the Quiet Council exiled you to the pit. He tried to show you mercy down there. I have been programmed with his most vital qualities." And Sabertooth kind of has a few snappy comebacks here and there, but for the most part, he doesn't take this projection seriously. So much so that he actually breaks out of the Iron Maiden and goes to attack it. And the projection realizes that just sitting down and having a conversation with Sabertooth is not going to work. So what it does is it recreates or kind of alters the perception of Sabertooth to where he's suddenly at the side, or really just kind of at a riverbank in this frozen landscape, really up in Canada. And he starts to kind of muse to himself. He says, "Therapist's office, mountains, I'm not getting fooled. None of this is real. Back when I got thrown in the pit, I lived in a simulated world while my body was trapped. Maybe that's what the seed was, like a mobile pit. But if I could get out of that one, I can get out of this one. I gotta get Blonde Boy back." he talks too much, but maybe I can tear the magic words out of him and get free of this game. And then he realizes, seemingly, somebody's behind him. But what happens is he starts to kind of realize that what's happening here is not any memory that he recalls, right? He's like, this is stupid. Why is my heart racing? None of this is real, but it's like my body believes it is. And he's like, get inside, get in and collect yourself. And once he starts looking around, he takes his gloves off and realizes these are not my hands, right? And he's like, what in the world is going on? And then it kicks in because there's a knock at the door and he realizes it's his own voice. And that's when the memory kicks back in. He's currently in the body of Silver Fox. Now, Silver Fox was a member of the Weapons Plus program that gave Wolverine his healing factor, but she was also a love interest of Wolverine. And so this ties into the very nature of Sabertooth with the whole birthday surprises story arc with his character. Basically, every year on Wolverine's birthday, Sabertooth kills whoever his love interest is, or at least tries, if it's somebody like Jean Grey, which he'll never be able to pull that off. But he even looks at a mirror and realizes he's not in his own body. He's reliving this memory from her perspective. And he's like, I remember every single thing that I did here, right? I remember her shooting at me. I remember losing my eye. And then I remember getting angry and I remember taking my time. And he's like, this is really going to hurt, right? So it's kind of a crazy little scenario there, right? Just going through and reliving all these memories. And so what you do is you have this moment where he's like, another memory, right? He's like, but this is not how I remember it. And again, it's kind of a flashback where he's experiencing this whole situation. But then that's when the Doug Ramsey persona pops back in and he's like, so what's the deal with this memory, right? What's the idea here? And he basically just kind of alludes to the notion that like this chick just kind of keeps the bad memories out of his head. There is a whole history behind this. Truthfully, if we were to explain it, it would tack on like 15 minutes to the video. So we're not going to go super in depth. And even then, it's not overly important here. What is important is why Sabertooth is experiencing these memories in the first place. Because the Doug Ramsey perception kind of has this bit of a conversation or statement where he says, these are not happy memories. So maybe you hold on to them for another reason. Maybe you feel guilty. And you kind of get this fast track, right? This sort of one-page splash of all these terrible things that he's done over the course of his existence. Even during like the original Mutant Massacre, when he went after Power Pack, right? I don't know how many of you guys know about that, but during the original Mutant Massacre storyline, you had tie-ins for that, right? You had a Thor tie-in when it was Eric Masterson, I'm pretty sure. And then you had Power Pack, which was like Franklin Richards and just a team of young superheroes. They kind of responded to this and they almost got killed, right? Sabertooth was just super hardcore back then. Of course, he attacked Iron Fist. Ironically enough, he was originally an Iron Fist villain before he was ever an X-Men villain. Yes, I know, it's kind of crazy. But then you snap back to this moment where you have him talking to the Doug Ramsey perception. And this is where the ending gets absolutely nuts. Because what Doug Ramsey says is he says, here's what I believe, Victor. He says, no, it's what I know. All of us have the capacity to be good. In fact, you were good for quite a while. You were a hero. Do you remember? I remember that, and in fact, it was some of the crappiest storytelling in Sabertooth's comic book history. He's much better as a villain than he is as a hero. I love just hardcore, no-holds-barred 1980s Sabertooth, right? I love that dude. He was just insane and hyper-violent. But he says, I'm starting to get it now. You don't see this seed, this trap is a punishment. And that's where the projection says, no, Victor, I hope that if you experienced what you've done to your victims, if you lived in their skin, it would shake free the best part of you. You wouldn't have done these things if you knew what you were putting others through. And Sabertooth kind of looks at him for a second and is like, do you know who I am? Because one of the things to know about Victor Creed, it's not one of these things where like he just doesn't know any better, right? He's very much like Zebediah Killgrave, right? One of the big things about like Purple Man, right, just kind of a sidetrack, Purple Man in the Jessica Jones show, totally different from the comics. In the comics, he was just mean, man. Just a really mean, terrible guy. And that's how Sabertooth was. Sabertooth just loves inflicting harm and pain on everyone he comes across for no other reason than the fact that he can. that's satisfactory enough for him. And so it's kind of a crazy little thing, because what you do is you sidetrack from Sabertooth for a second and you pick up with Wolverine when he goes after Graydon Creed. Now the fight between the two of them, again, it's kind of small fries and it's sort of a background thing. Obviously Wolverine does not have an adamantium suit of armor and a Muramasa blade in order to fight the son of Sabertooth, who's been pulled in from an alternate dimension. That's not the case. Instead, you snap back to Sabertooth himself, and he's like, "You have such a big heart, Doug, but I cannot say much for your brain." And that's where the projection starts to realize that there is no saving Sabertooth, right? And Sabertooth's like, "You got that big of a heart, so you assume that we all do. You cannot imagine that there are people in the world who were just built different. You think every wounded child just needs a hug and a cookie, and that'll make them fit right in. I didn't hold on to those memories because I feel guilty. I held on to them because they make me proud. You making me relive them has had the opposite effect that you were shooting for. It didn't make me sad. It's got my blood flowing. I feel vigorous." And what you get here is this amazing quote, right, where it says, "Odin's men rushed forwards without armor, were as mad as dogs or wolves, bit their shields, and were strong as boars or wild oxen, and killed people at a blow. But neither fire nor iron told upon them. This was called Berserker Gang." Basically, what we're getting, ladies and gentlemen, is Sabertooth going into a berserker rage, because this guy emerges and the first thing he sees is Wolverine fighting Graydon Creed, which means the question has to be asked: what happens when Wolverine, with an adamantium suit of armor and a Muramasa blade, fights against Sabertooth in a berserker and overpowered state? I'm excited to find out, guys, because that'll be the ending of the story. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Make sure you click this playlist to get caught up on Sabertooth War if you need it, and I will catch you all later. Peace.